begun. So it's the golden age of America, and that's what it's going to be. And we hope we don't have any intervening problems, because things happen.
Can I hear that again?
Intervening problems, because things happen.
Now, to those who have ears to hear can clearly hear that something is coming. For those who have wisdom can pick up what Mr. Golden Age is laying down. And this Golden Age terminology is very New Age. As we can see right here, the Golden Age, Aquarius, and the Ring Planet. And this is coming from the official Theosophical Society website. Now, for those who do not know what Theosophy is, it is a religious and philosophical system established in the United States in the late 19th century. It was founded primarily by the Russian Helena Blavatsky and based largely on her writings. It draws heavily from both old European philosophies, such as Neoplatonism, and Indian religions, such as Hinduism and Buddhism. And as we can see down here, it is clumped in with new religious movements and form of occultism. Now, the founder of the Theosophical Society, or should I say the co-founder, is Helena Blavatsky, a Russian and American mystic and author who co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. This Theosophical Society loves to talk about the Golden Age, where you also had Alice Bailey, who was an author about 25 books on theosophy and among the first writers to use the term New Age, who directly speaks about the prophecy of the Golden Age and the reappearance of the Christ. Now, her writings between 1919 and 1949 describe a wide-ranging neo-theosophical system of esoteric thought covering such topics as how spirituality relates to the solar system, meditation, healing, spiritual psychology, and destiny of nations, and prescriptions for society in general. Now, get this, she described the majority of her work as having been telepathically dictated to her by a master of wisdom, initially referred to only as the Tibetan. Now, her writings bore the same similarities of those of Blavatsky. So through meditation and esoteric spirituality, they were channeling these ascended masters, where one of Alice Bailey's writings was about the reappearance of the Christ, which there will be a dawning upon the awakening consciousness of humanity. Sound familiar? X, the group chat, collective conscious of Earth. Now, this reappearance of the Christ was prophesied to happen in the year 2025, as we can see down here coming from Lucis Trust, which used to be Lucifer Trust, which was founded by Alice Bailey. And we can see right here, 2025 is a Jubilee year in the Christian and Jewish calendar that is also the focus of prophecy. And students of the writings of Alice Bailey know that the year 2025 is anticipated to be of vital spiritual significance. And according to her teachings, this hierarchy consists of ascended masters and spiritual entities guiding humanity's evolution. Bailey claimed that these beings hold a significant meeting every 100 years with their human agents, with the next major and final General Assembly scheduled for 2025. Now, something else I found interesting is how on January 20th, 2025, we have a start date for Aquarius, which we can see down here. Aquarius season is a time when people are encouraged to embrace their individuality, thinking outside the box, and advocate for positive change in their communities and the world. It's a season that celebrates uniqueness and collective consciousness. Where do we see that before? So all of this coming together at the same time that Mr. Golden Dawn is ushering in the Golden Age.
Welcome back to the Golden Age of Saturn's America. Continuing on from pretty much exactly where we left off at the end of the last episode. Instead of increasing productivity to maintain the efficiency of their rule, which is again their prime function. If you're a manager, of course, yes, you're also tasked with the efficiency of productivity. But ultimately, if you look at it very, very realistically, logically, if you have no power as a manager to affect productivity, if you don't protect and shore up your position as a manager within the hierarchy, then of course you cannot affect productivity. Do you see the issue? So this is where it probably stems from. There's most likely other psychological reasons for it, and I touch upon that in my Managerialist series, Why the Managerialist State Will Fail. And even with AI, by the way, it will undoubtedly fail. It's so inhuman, it's anti-human. And by the way, this also links with what appears to be, to a lot of people, the effeminization of the political system. And I was watching a Sargon of Akkad video recently, and he talked about these two archetypes, the Den Mother and the Sky Father. Now, the Sky Father, of course, exists at the beginning of a civilizational cycle. That is essentially the pioneering phase, the phase of the breakout, if you will, of the civilization, where they are the upstarts, and they are, again, like the Trump card within that geographical or geopolitical region, right? And they take over vast swathes of land, and eventually they become fat on their conquests and the new trade goods that they have acquired. And of course, a story as old as time itself, they inexorably fall from the heights of grace and virtue, and eventually languish and expire under the broken canopy of their own moral iniquity. So what you tend to find is that bureaucracy is in fact quite an effeminate thing. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look, again, we're not talking about males and females as individuals, because of course we all embody these polarity of energies in differing volumes, differing mixes. That's of course what creates our unique personalities. But what I'm talking about is the literal primal energies of the male and the female. The male is that which is, he is the moral arbiter. That's why, as Sargon of Akkad stated in that video, males tend not to cry, or of course previously in the previous states of civilization where military honours were of greater import than, say, one's bank balance or academic credentials. Males were not supposed to cry. They were supposed to be moral arbiters and an emotional compass to strike the way forward, to stand there as a rock that could not be budged, that was, strong. And of course, that idea of the heroic masculine is actually what keeps civilizations healthy and fresh and alive. Now, that said, there of course is a fine line between order and despotism. This fine line is sometimes, most often actually, it's broached within these early formative, nascent military conquest phases of a civilization. You typically find feudalism and other such despotic governmental systems take root. Now, that said, by the end of a civilization, you will typically find the Den Mother archetype takes over. This toxic femininity takes over. Now, the Sky Father isn't necessarily it's not necessarily toxically masculine. In fact, the Den Mother isn't usually toxically feminine. It's only toxically feminine when the Sky Father dies, when that heroic masculinity becomes vilified. So there's an imbalance, right, in the system. This imbalance inverts and turns everything toxic. And you're seeing that today. Now, what do I mean by the effeminization of the governmental or political system? What I mean is typically what we see with bureaucracy. Literally everything becomes a potential route and a potential avenue for insecurity, potential hazards. Everything in society is clinically sterilized to ameliorate that insecurity that is felt by the Den Mother archetype that's present within the bureaucratic machine. And moreover as well, it seeks to safeguard everything in society. Now, of course, eventually, like any extreme, You take that to a certain point, and you tend to find weird and wacky and wonderful things occurring within society. Moreover, you tend to find that this obsessiveness, this absolute histrionic need to safeguard all of society and to, of course, share the blame amongst all parties in society so that nobody feels left out, so that everyone feels included. Hence, of course, the progressive obsession with inclusivity and diversity and all of these buzzwords. That is all based upon, you could say, feminine archetypal social etiquette. And fundamentally, its primary function is to ensure that the members of the family do not feel as though they are not part of that family. It's to provide unity, so there's a certain evolutionary and social reason for it. But again, it doesn't appear to work well when extrapolated to a civilization or society. And a mother within the den, within the home, within the longhouse, right, wherever it may be, she is tasked with being the thread that binds the family together. That is what her entire purpose is, essentially, as the mother. The father, of course, is the expansive force. The mother is the not necessarily limiting force, but it is the force that provides a certain semblance of continuity within the confines, a certain sense of comfort when one returns home from, I don't know, a voyage or an expedition or a hunt back to the hearth and home. So again, it's this caring maternal sensibility that is there present within the feminine archetype. Now again, that has, as we've been exploring here, that has multiple dimensions, and it has things it's good at, and it has things which it is just patently unprepared to deal with, as does the masculine archetype. Now, the feminine archetype of the mother, and of course its malefic aspect of the devouring mother, and all of the other things in between, all of the other archetypes and variants, is that it seeks within the family to ensure that all of the party members do not feel the disquietude of self-doubt, that they do not feel critical of oneself. A mother will love unconditionally, which itself is a benefit in certain situations, but in other situations, when you're dealing with the overbearing mother or the devouring mother, they will encase you and insulate you in cotton wool and detach you from the world, because again, deep in their soul, deep in that archetype that they embody, of no fault of their own, is that need to safeguard their children and their family members from the world itself. And of course, without the complementary nature of the sky father or masculine archetype at play within the hearth and the home, and of course within the family members' landscape and social landscape, then of course their personal growth, their personal development could be stifled from that growth could be stifled. Now, when this is extrapolated to all of society through, hate speech, affirmative action, body positivity movement, inclusion, diversity, love is love, etc., 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 what that does is it promotes what are, in the long-term projection, and based on historical precedents, unhealthy behaviours that are not conducive to the civilization. But, again, as the sort of feminine archetype is, as the motherly archetype is, as the, again, and in its malefic aspect of the overbearing or devouring mother, most of the feminine archetypes seek to ensure that firstly all of the blame is shared equally amongst all members of society, that no responsibility is loaded onto a single bearer within that family, and that moreover as well, all people feel as though they're included in the family, all family members feel as though they're included in the family as well. And you also find as well within feminine social etiquette that there's a certain, again, men tend to resolve their conflicts through direct violence and aggression. It's usually quite rapid in its resolutive capabilities, and it tends to be longer lasting in terms of the resolution, in terms of the peace that it brings. Now, for example, individuals who have scrapped, I've seen them become best of friends afterwards, right? So there's a certain purifying aspect to it that works far more rapidly than what you see within the counterpart, in my opinion, of the feminine social etiquette, and the way that the feminine archetype resolves conflict. And the way they resolve conflict is very protracted. It's psychological, and it's based upon social ostracization, bringing the enemy into disrepute amongst the social group through gossip, the spinning of rumours, and so on and so forth. These are relational methods of conflict resolution, and ultimately, on both the microcosmic and macrocosmic level, meaning microcosmic, the social group itself, macrocosmic, the entire society. If, of course, this sort of social etiquette and these relational methods of conflict resolution, which are more archetypically feminine, are extrapolated to the wider society, then such strategies, of course, consequently, will cultivate resentment, bitterness, and deep-seated animosity, which will contribute directly to a predictable outcome of breakdown of relationships. Of course, everyone will hate each other. They will see each other as irrational actors, and instead of resolving the conflict rapidly and in a far more constructive way, a way that is far more open, these methods tend to suppress they suppress the conflict itself through social control. They cause festering resentments that ultimately lead to societal fragmentation and the inability to form truly cohesive functional units based on respect and shared truth. They essentially impede familial creation. And moreover as well, with this breakdown of the familial unit, you also find a greater degree of individuals who are entirely atomized and who are, well, because they've been exposed to this socially universal den mother archetype, which the government has imbued, and essentially the rest of the echelons of society have also expressed and exhibited, then of course they're wrapped in cotton wool. There's no growth, there's no development. They have been completely confined and insulated from the responsibility, from the consequences of responsibility, from the consequences of life choices, from perhaps, hearty words, right, while they reside within their safe space, with their, digital pacifiers and what have you, which of course is social media. So they've never really been exposed to any sort of contention or critique against their ideas. So they live in a total echo chamber. And if they go out with that echo chamber, they begin to, lo and behold, as we see in today's society, they tend to get mental health issues, right? Because, of course, they are not special snowflakes. Nobody is a special snowflake. Humanity has intrinsic worth, but ultimately you have to realise that there's a great deal of people out there that don't see in you any sort of intrinsic worth. They do not care if they hurt your feelings. Hell, they would probably sell your life for $20. There's a great deal of predation out there. Interspecies predation. Humans predating on other humans. This may not be of a violent quality, it may be entirely of a quality of competition. But again, the Den Mother archetype seeks to insulate oneself from competition too. So you get this sort of quasi-communistic society. Instead of an equality of opportunity, you get an equality of outcome, which of course is detrimental to the life expectancy and the longevity of that society. However, it is very beneficial to a tyranny, because what it cultivates in the population is a sort of learned helplessness, because they've never had to grow. They have either had weak fathers, or the weak father archetype has been totally, and I mean totally, if you look at adverts and movies, pop culture, every time a father is referenced, especially a white father, of course, then he is always a complete nincompoop, as as the old timey people would say, right? He is a complete idiot, a dolt, as we say in Scotland, a dafty. He can never do anything right, and it's always the mother that has to step in to sort out his mess. That fathers, when they're shown, usually within media, they're seen as little more than overgrown man-children, essentially. And there's also other things to mention, so that with the feminine relational method of conflict resolution, as we've mentioned, gossip and social ostracization. Gossip, in all of that, which it entails, it acts as powerful yet sort of informal gatekeeping mechanisms. Now, it essentially acts upon the mechanism of undermining an individual's reputation, right? Casting them as undesirable, incompetent, untrustworthy, of course regardless of objective facts, and it also may cast them as a moral evil, so it moralizes them. All of these things are to moralize the individual, to moralize what they say. Instead of looking at them impartially, you look at them emotionally, you judge them emotionally, you don't hear their words, you identify the emotional resonance from their words. And to see, of course, if it lines up with the group identity, if it lines up with loyalty, the loyalty of the group, the narrative that the group is proposing. And of course, this is why you get these very wacky and strange beliefs taking hold, which is another sort of, again, extreme, toxic, feminine archetype. It's in an extreme, right? There's no balance. There's no balance between the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine. So what you tend to find is to almost virtue signal, and this is what virtue signaling is about, right? To express and exhibit and to display to the rest of the group your loyalty. You will craft bold-faced lies, or you will defend bold-faced lies if it suits the narrative controls of the group. So this is why you have, effeminate men, which are by and large becoming the well, they're becoming the majority in the cosmopolitan areas at least, and of course more progressively centred women, where they've taken on this sort of overbearing mother archetype, or this den mother archetype. You find that they will tell you with a completely straight face the most absurd lies, right? Easily discernible lies. I can't actually mention them. I think you can sort of figure out what we're talking about here. Can't mention them there. This is going up to YouTube, but that which, of course, orbits the woke ideas and the progressive ideas, things that are completely, I mean, even to the average Joe, is discernible lies. Unscientific. It contravenes basic biological science, or it may contravene basic social or societal understanding, sociology, and it's completely farcical. But they will mention it, they will declare it with such boldness, with such resoluteness, even when they're called out as liars. But they will never change their opinion. Why? Because their opinion is moulded to the group's opinion, or what they perceive as the group's opinion. Thus, the lie is the symbol of loyalty to the group. It is a collective negotiation strategy. It is, again, an informal, it's a pervasive means of disseminating and enforcing a collective narrative that is totally absurd. This is what cults do, and it's designed to ensure group participation in the lie as almost a universal symbol of perfection. So the lie, the illusion, is a universal symbol of perfection, and it allows the group to collectively maintain this social delusion, which they find salvation in, very perversely. And moreover as well, as we'll get into later on, that this causes low trust societies. It causes societies that are inherently violent, that have low control over the criminal elements of that society. Again, if everyone's perfect, if everyone is a tabula rasa, if everyone is born equal and is equal and should have equal outcome, of course, equal outcome in terms of having the top positions, being the top earners, having just intrinsic, not intrinsic worth as a human being, but intrinsic worth financially, in terms of power, in terms of the rights one is afforded, of course, barring any responsibilities that is not factored into. All of that really creates a society where completely aberrant, deviant, criminal behaviour becomes completely fine. It becomes normalised. It even becomes championed, in fact, as we saw through, well, 2020, right? Defund the police, or ACAB. However, this lie as loyalty, this virtue signalling, this complete loyalty and allegiance to things that are patently absurd, again, as a show of in-group preference, as a show of preference against that of the heroically masculine, which was, of course, previously the antecedent force which brought the entire empire into being, and of course still maintains the empire itself. That is typically shunned, it's vilified, and of course all of the narrative controls, all of the mutual validation, all of the devouring mother, the overbearing mother, the den mother archetype, this sort of toxic femininity that takes an extreme hold in the society because of the lack of that counterbalance of the masculine energy, that essentially begins to, like the Den Mother does, root out the Sky Father, root out the masculine, root out the heroic, and root out the protector, because she feels as though, again, the archetype feels as though they do not require the heroically masculine anymore, that they seek to transcend that they seek to create a world full of love, full of kumbayas. Of course, the world isn't like that. And moreover, ironically, the only way to create a world like that would be through this sort of masculine tendency of conquest, not of the feminine principle of bridging the divide. Because ultimately, if you're attempting to bring the entire world into one globalized conglomerate of individuals who abide not within their own traditional cultures, but have given that up, surrendered it voluntarily for this grey man culture, this plastic culture of consumerism, which is what the West and the Den Mother archetype, the overbearing mother archetype, desires of its children. Again, consumerism, because any mother wants for her child, especially if it's an overbearing mother, to enjoy the fruits of the civilization all equally. But she never really truly has to think of where that food is coming from. Again, because previously, according to the archetype, previously it was the masculine archetype that would bring home the bacon on a civilizational level. But that is now gone. So ultimately, these civilizations, once they become extremely feminine, once they become effeminized, then what tends to occur is they live off the fumes of the previous civilization. They live on the reserves that father was storing up for the civilizational winter of discomfort before he, popped his clogs and kicked the bucket, so to say, before he was, murdered by the overbearing mother. And, of course, eventually the overbearing mother is toppled by the barbarians on the hinterland who comprise the new heroically masculine. They bring the overbearing mother into balance. They bring her, of course, underfoot. And this is the way civilizations have always gone. It just appears to be the archetypal narrative and story. It's the way that the energies always appear to play out. Of course, don't get me wrong, I think it's entirely artificial. You see a lot of what's going on in this society, and it appears unbelievably ritualistic. Unbelievably ritualistic. I was just showing, I believe it was maybe 10 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, that very interesting infographic where you see this, again, the feminine chalice symbol. You find the inverted triangle, right? Obviously showcasing the receptive principle, and of course the limiting principle as well. So ultimately, you see this ritualistic marker, which of course is an alchemical symbol. It's even a Kabbalistic symbol as well. It appears in some Kabbalistic tomes and works from the 18th century. Abraham Eliezer, for example, from his work, the age-old chemical work, which I believe was published in 1735, and then it was republished, a second edition was done in 1760. It's the same sort of ritualistic principles that you see constantly recurring. Why do they use these symbols, these ritualistic frameworks? Because they're psychologically compatible with humankind, and as we see within the Zohar, the idea is to trick the shaitan. It's to trick the world, it's to trick nature, it's to preempt the cycles. and to thus artificially find a loophole round them so that they may maintain their position of power, right? Cycle after cycle after cycle, like some sort of undead Draculean figure, right? Some sort of zombie overlord, a necromancer, so to say. That is exactly what we see at play here. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people will watch this video and they will say, oh, you're talking about the feminine archetype, so you must be speaking about females. Evidently not. That's not what I'm speaking to. The female, of course, has a lot of that feminine archetypal energy, but so do men, especially as the late stage empire comes about, the late stage civilization. Men become even more effeminate than women. Women actually tend to become more masculinized. Funnily enough, there's an inversion of the sexes. But fundamentally, civilization is a man's game. It's created by men, and in fact, it's destroyed by men. Women tend to not deal in such childishness, right, as civilization. Digressing, however, the mainstay idea of late-stage civilizations, especially when the Den Mother archetype takes hold, universally speaking, is that everyone is perfect, that everyone is equal, that everyone, of course, should have access to top corporate jobs. And this permits the group to collectively sort of love bomb their members, right? And that is through this mass delusion, this social delusion that everyone is perfect, that everyone is equal, everyone is born equal, right? Which is patently absurd. Again, that's an absurdity that, by the way, has carried on through Western society ever since the Enlightenment. I mean, it's totally absurd. Nobody is born a tabula rasa, as John Locke stated. We're not born as blank slates. We are born into specific roles. We are born into specific tribes. We're not tabula rasas. We have an epigenetic memory as well. You have all of these markers, both genetic, epigenetic, and cultural, which basically shapes you from the womb. As soon as you enter the world, you are shaped by these things. Like a stone is dressed by a stonemason. They're inescapable. Completely inescapable. And you can recalcitrant, and of course you can recalcitrantly oppose them, but they will always just generate a shadow which will in time engulf you if you don't integrate it once more. So yes, it's the same idea you see in the feminine archetypal circles, right? The feminine archetype, it seems to dictate a certain behavioural pattern where, for example, females tend not to denounce unattractiveness within their lessers, right? Meaning their socio-sexual lessers, right? Females that are, compared to them, far less attractive on the totem pole. So they will always say that everyone is a 10, that everyone is beautiful, that we're all, equality, we're all equal. Well, it's just diversity. We're all beauty is contained in this diversity, that people are just diversely beautiful, that it's all just subjective anyway. So there's no objective beauty. Things like that fall away as well. Again, this is the collective negotiating strategy. It's this sort of token of submission to universal perfection. That everyone is perfect, that everyone needs access to, the top rungs of the ladder. We need an equality of outcome, not an equality of opportunity. and all of this loyalty through lying. All of that is really expressed in the feminine archetype and its strategy. Again, I'm not talking about females per se. We all are made up of both the masculine and feminine energies and archetypes. Of course, it's not always an equal measure, and it's not always to the extreme. But when we're talking about social organisms, they tend to have less nuance in terms of the overlap of these energies. That it tends, in terms of the cycles of civilization, they tend to exhibit these archetypes in a far more extreme and polarizing manner. And ultimately, this overbearing mother archetype, this extreme and toxically feminine archetype, when it takes hold of the civilization, like what we see in the mythologies, of course you have Anat from the Semitic mythos, and of course it appears within the ancient Egyptian mythos, and the Hindu equivalent of Mahakala, the Black Bride, or Kali, that ferocious, fiery, feminine archetype of the reset of the cycles of time itself. When that is brought forward, there's a perversion of power dynamics. Due to this constant mutual validation, these virtue signalings, right? The body positivity one is a prime example of that. So you find a perversion of power dynamics. This appears within, again, as I stated, the constant mutual validation amongst the group. And it's a subtle but potent form of social control, right? It's a gatekeeping mechanism. It's a way to exert control over the population. It's very dystopian. I remember when I was growing up, you would always have these very overly effeminate songs. You know, build up one another, build up your sisters and brothers. The best thing that ever happened to me when I was growing up is I was bullied for 3 years. And do you know what I did on the 3rd year? I picked up the gumption and I found the strength within myself to punch out my bully and give him a bloodied nose. And that single event in my life changed the course of my entire life. It set forth a sort of precedent within my life that I never would again be on the receiving end of violence perpetrated against me for the primary reason of gaining my subordination to another. So, to me, I never really understood after that why boys who have this natural tendency, this natural urge to fight one another, that was somehow vilified. It was it was criminalized as well in society, and it was deterred and discouraged within the school system. I never understood that, because ultimately what I was seeing was that you had boys coming out of school that had never actually been in a fight. And I don't really think you fully understand yourself as a boy or a man until you get into a physical altercation. Now, I'm not saying I enjoy violence. I actually am opposed to it. I'm a very civil person. But there's times in your life where you have to find that courage within yourself. And it doesn't come from singing little silly songs of let's build up everyone. There's some people that really you don't want to build up. You have to have enemies, otherwise you have no friends. It's this strange, this universal mutual validation that you do get with the feminine archetype, which has taken over society in a very toxic way. If you mutually validate everyone, then you validate even the worst in society, which is of course why criminality is rampant. which is why we now reside in a state of anarcho-tyranny, where essentially the criminals are being given free rein to run amok like little demons springing up from hell, and law-abiding citizens are being brushed aside, or if they try to defend themselves from the criminal elements, they themselves are winding up in jail. They themselves are winding up being labelled as criminals. So again, you have this sort of hand-holding, and it was something I never understood growing up. And don't get me wrong, you have to learn empathy. You have to learn to love. But you also, there's certain times where you have to learn to hate. And you have to learn to tap into that aggressiveness within yourself. That's both for men and women. The best spiritual path you can take is to find the eros gamos, which is the sacred marriage between the masculine and the feminine, between the thinker and the fighter, between the judgmental and, of course, the acceptor. You have to find the middle path, but I can assure you, if you mutually validate everyone, if you build up everyone, and everyone is automatically your sisters and brothers, yeah, okay, try that outside of the West. See how that works out for you. That's why you get these strange and peculiar individuals going, on bike rides through India and Afghanistan and, other areas of the world, which are, of course, not of this sort of perverse power dynamic that we have here in the West, this sort of overbearing mother archetype that's taken over. They're not of that archetype, societally speaking. And you find that, of course, these people end up either getting maimed or, grievously hurt in some way, or, of course, even worse than that, I dare not say. It's because they've bought the propaganda. They believe that the entire world are all their brothers and sisters, a bit like that Coca-Cola advert. That old 70s advertisement song, I'd like to buy the world a Coke, right? And everyone's sitting there in perfect harmony, right? I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's in human nature to war, to fight, to find conflict. What we're living in today is a very aberrant and unusual time period. We've got 70 years of peace. That tends not to happen in history, in the historical record. So you're starting to see very strange behaviour take hold in society, and these weird collective delusions of universalism. It doesn't exist outside of the bounds of the West. And the problem is, the West are so utterly ignorant that they don't realise we are about as propagandized as North Korea. In fact, I would say our propaganda and the propagandization of the population is far in excess of what occurs within North Korea. The propaganda is so good that you get individuals actually taking bike rides to places like the Congo, which is in the middle of a civil war, or you get humanitarian aid workers thinking they're, I don't know, some Superman from Krypton, which will go down to the barbaric and primitive area and save the day, right? Only to find, they get shot by some ne'er-do-wells in the midst of a civil war. That tells you the propaganda is pretty damn effective. If people are actually willing to forgo all common sense and act like complete morons who, again, will lie for loyalty to the narrative, to the group, to the collective delusion that equality is possible, universal perfectionism, universal equality is possible, right? That is the collective delusion. These people, like any sort of religious adherent who is fanatical and zealous enough, will and are giving up their lives for the cause, giving up their lives because it's too much for them. They have too much emotionally invested. They're too scared to be socially ostracized by the group and the narrative controls of the group to simply state the fact that what the group believe is untenable, it is idiotic, and it's a complete and utter delusion. It has absolutely no foundation in reality whatsoever. But again, they can't do that, so they would rather willingly go to their deaths. Just like in the West, they would also rather diminish beauty, turn everything bland, grey, completely conformist, while believing absurdly and ludicrously that they are not conformist, or that what they've expressed and produced isn't a symbol or marker of conformity. You know, they're being funded by BlackRock and large asset management corporations that have larger GDPs than some countries combined. And they believe that they're fighting the system. They're locked into this perpetual idiocy, that the revolution that they believe they're a part of is being televised, and it's also being subsidised by the very system that they believe they are fighting against. It's insane. These people are insane. The population, by and large, within these cosmopolitan hellholes are insane. You're getting self-destructive levels of altruism as well within society too. But again, you see this throughout the civilizational cycles. This is how they tear down a civilization. It is how they artificially collapse the civilization itself. And yes, another way this overbearing mother archetype, this toxically feminine archetype, again, it's having no complementary counterbalance within the masculine. And of course, the masculine at these time periods of the end of a civilization has completely fallen off. It's essentially like the old lion. It's the old male lion. It has fell asleep under the shade of the tree amidst its dying savanna. But the overbearing mother, it erodes objective standards of beauty. It erodes objective standards in their totality. And it erodes meritocracy. That's why you have a competency crisis. That's why you have individuals now that are chosen based on race or other congenital characteristics, rather than their talents or qualifications, be them academic or just merely perceivable qualifications. If they, if they're street smart, if they simply just have the intelligence and the bona fides to carry out the job with some degree of skill. Again, things like reparations, things like love is love, other ideas that portend even worse outcomes, such as the whole MAP thing, right? That's starting to take off socially. All of this is based on this constant mutual validation. The feminine archetype taken to its extreme. The den mother archetype. The overbearing mother archetype taken to its extreme. The infantilization of the population, offering conditional approval and creating a sort of dependency on external validation, on social virtue signaling, on lying for the loyalty of the group, right? Rather than fostering genuine autonomy, agency, or earned respect. And of course, not even fostering earned respect through championing ideas and championing the marketplace of ideas. All of that must go, because again, any of this could be corrosive to the individual, and it could derail the strategy of mutual validation. So you find this quite a lot, instead of challenging people, which is the more masculine viewpoint, challenging people, not violently of course, but challenging people in terms of ideas, right? The marketplace of ideas, that you deviate from that and you engage in this sort of, again, mutual validation, building up your one another, building up your sisters and brothers, right? Instead of challenging their underlying lies that they believe, the underlying superstitions that they may abide within, or challenging itself the blind spots within their intellect, the blind spots within their understanding of the world. So again, if you do that, if you actually challenge them, then you risk social ostracization. And this derailment of masculinity itself, this vilification of it, and essentially its resignation within the modern world, really has affected young men in a very profound way. That is why even bother. You have this sort of deep-seated and inherent aimlessness within the modern consumeristic world. This relentless hamster wheel of consumerism has left us all completely deracinated, and ultimately what you find is that the men today don't want to be the fathers of the future because there are no mothers of the future. And moreover as well, what is even the point in striving to become perfection personified if perfection itself in the modern world is slavery? And what is the point of pursuing one's own improvement in a soulless, consumeristic husk of a system? So men now are living atomized lives. We've substituted communities for conformity. So we no longer have any sort of genuine expression of our humanity, or any genuine expression between neighbours. Everything is political, everything has to be based around the narrative. If it's not the sensitivity training, the diversity training, all of this HR bullshit, all of it totally nullifies and seeks to turn the masculine energy into a nihilistic and alienated mess. But the demonization of all of this, of the masculine itself, it doesn't just eradicate masculinity. You're not going to eradicate masculinity. What it will do is drive it underground. And you're going to get the same extreme response like what occurred when masculinity drove femininity underground. We got the response, which was an extreme response, and we got the Enlightenment period, and we got the sexual revolution, and all of this, right? Femininity came back as an energy, an archetypal energy, with a vengeance. Now, of course, we could argue this was artificial. This was all part of the grand script, and I would agree with that. But if we don't begin to see that these archetypal energies, these polarities are being used against us, then we're going to be constantly caught in this reoccurring cycle of a perpetual performance, a perpetual cosmic play that we will never actually be able to step away from, that we will never be able to, in fact, awaken the deeper potential in us as a species.
We see the creation of a new massive class of useless people. As computers become better and better in more and more fields, there is a distinct possibility that computers will outperform us in most tasks and will make humans redundant. And then the big political and economic question of the 21st century will be, what do we need humans for? Or at least, what do we need so many humans for?
Do you have an answer in the book?
At present, the best guess we have is keep them happy with drugs and computer games.